What on earth is going on here? This is mental. It's just about the worst question we've had on the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Good Practice Podcast, a weekly show about work, performance and learning. I'm Ross Dickie, and this week we're talking about digital transformation. I'm joined as ever by Owen Ferguson. Hello, Owen.
Hi, Ross.
Along with guest Julie Drybrough from Fuchsia and Daniel Caborn of Manchester Metropolitan University. Hello guys, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
So Julie, I'll start with you. Do you want to get us started by just explaining what we mean exactly when we talk about digital transformation? I'll have to confess that when we decided to talk about this topic, I instantly went to Google to try and find out what we were going to be discussing. So do you want to give us your take on what digital transformation actually means?
You know, just as you said that, I was going, I haven't Googled this. So I don't know, I have no idea what Google says about it. So digital transformation from my perspective, I am looking at the transformation from a cultural perspective. So digital from a technology perspective can come into a culture, and the expectation sometimes is that the technology will transform the culture. And I think as we go through this, it's open to interpretation as to whether that's true or not. Dan, is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. So I didn't do the Google search either, but I did kind of go for a bit of a reductionist view. So digital and transformation, for me, I guess like a really nice ice cream sundae, transformation is transformation, but digital gives it a slightly different flavour. So as much as some of the other organisations I've worked in, the transformational element is familiar, but actually what that introduces can be slightly different. So digital could be technically in terms of how you engage with your customers, or it might be how you're engaging with the people that work with you, and help enabling them to work in a different way. And the transformational side of thing, well, for me, that's the people element. It's a social process of making meaning out of what is happening and might be happening within the organisation.
Because you've both been working together on a digital transformation program at Manchester Metropolitan University, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of the impetus behind that program and how you've approached it?
Yeah, so the program itself sets out to improve the student journey. So that takes them from inquiry right the way through to alumni, and looking at how the organisation organises itself. It is around an ERP system, but it was recognised really early on that actually the system itself is one component of that change, that the ways of working needed to change and was an opportunity to improve how things were. But the ways of working then impact on what it feels like to work there. So therefore there is a cultural and a leadership aspect to making this truly transformational. So there's a whole ream of work going on on that piece of that particular project, but also including lots of different people from across the university to help us try and shape what that looks like. I think for me that one of the key parts is that digital comes from drivers from in this case for improving student experience and improving staff experience, to be a really competitive university in a very competitive market. And
is that where you're sort of starting from, like the sort of impact on people, rather than sort of necessarily approaching it from these are the technologies that we as a university need to have, and so we need to roll them out and people just kind of need to accept it?
I think all that happens. So because of the scale of the program, that there are some really good people who are incredibly specialist at what they do, from a technical perspective, from a change perspective, from a process perspective. I think the value that the program sees is they've also invested in the people element as well, and I think that's a real credit to one of the draws that got me to the role. Actually, was that they were really looking to do that as well.
So, it sounds like you've got a really positive rallying point there, which is about improving the student journey. That I think that makes a massive difference, because digital transformation is this vague term for a lot of organizations. I think it's a case of right, let's move on to Office 365 or Google Apps, or let's get people using Slack because all the funky companies are using it, and let's give everyone laptops or Surface Pros, and so that they can move around and sit in different places if they want to. And it's almost like, let's just do the same things that we were doing before, but do them smarter, using internal kind of office-based tools, whereas true digital transformation is much more outward service facing, and of course all that stuff can be part of that journey, but you're looking at from the perspective of, right, okay, the people that we serve, how do we improve their experience, and then sort of all the things that you do from there then fall out of that, or that's at least what I would assume based on the tiny little snippet that you've given.
I suppose where we've come in on this rallying cry that you're talking about, Owen, means that you can be really clear within the culture about where the focus areas are. So there are pieces of the culture which are already very student focused, for instance, and have a real pride in what they're doing. So you don't want to lose that. But then there's other parts of the culture which are not necessarily where the university would want them to be. So it's about being really clear culturally where you're focusing your activities, and that's where we've kind of been working together. So we've tried to identify where the digital impact will happen, and then what do we need to do where it's going to fall.
When you're talking about it internally, within Manchester Metropolitan University, is it referred to as a digital transformation program? Because I'm sort of interested in whether or not the term digital transformation is itself somewhat problematic, in that it seems so sort of vast and all-encompassing that it's not just that we're going to change, or that we're just we're going to adopt Office 365. It's that we're going to completely transform this organization digitally, and it can seem perhaps like a sort of gargantuan task. I'm wondering how you sort of communicate about it internally.
The title of the program is Student Journey Transformation Program, so digital doesn't feature in those four words, and I think it kind of comes back to the point before about actually the purpose is about that experience and more horizontal thinking along a student's journey. Technology is an enabler to that, and I think that's where it fits, I think.
So one of the things that you guys mentioned was around changes to ways of working. And when I think about technology adoption with either organisations that we work with, or even internally in good practice, it's actually that the actual technology itself, you need to make it, a good intuitive user experience, etc. But there's certain norms in terms of people's behaviours and their attitudes and their willingness to give things a go that make the biggest difference. Their tolerance for things not being quite right first time, and being able to work with whoever's sort of looking after the sort of the technology part. That stuff makes the difference between something flopping and something being a success. So to what extent does that stuff inform the work that you guys are doing?
Which stuff? The stuff that for people to be willing to
willing to give it a go, thinking about how they can contribute to improving the experience as well.
There's quite a lot of trial and error stuff that's been happening, isn't there? There's been a lot of stress testing and giving people the opportunity to try things out, be involved in the introduction of a new process or the introduction of letting go of the old ways of working. So there's been a lot of time and effort put into that so that people feel more kind of comfortable and capable around it. Yeah,
the word care actually comes to mind, actually, in terms of ensuring that we get to a point, the best point that we can do at that particular moment in time. I think digital transformation and technological transformation, there's a few things that come with that, and I think you've picked them up there. So there is an element of nearly right, nearly ready, but let's give it a go anyway. that actually it's ever evolving as well. So you don't necessarily get to an end point. You're always getting to something else, to something else, to something else. And that, from a mindset perspective, I think it's something that we've talked often about, Julie, about actually from and this could be in any organisation, that from a relatively stable change environment, i.e. we're changing all the time, to one that leads more into a digital transformation, it's likely that is going to accelerate. So in whichever industry you're in. And that, from a leadership perspective, is a really challenging place to be, because it puts you in, again, quite a difficult place. What do I do to engage with my teams now when actually even I don't know what the outcome's going to be? I might have a vague idea, or I might have 3 or 4 versions of what I think might be. And it creates lots of different dilemmas. And I think that stems from kind of where, that technological transformation, it's part of the deal that you're going to get with that. And there's some of the things that we're trying to face into now in terms of how do you help leaders and individuals get used to that as a way of working. It's not going to go away, really. It's going to continue as things just keep evolving.
I think it could be mad complicated. You could make it really complicated if you want to. And there were some basic things that we knew, that we identified fairly quickly, that we had to pay attention to culturally. I'm speaking specifically about the cultural piece. And the first was looking at the actual picture now. So how ready and willing are people now, genuinely? Not like how ready or willing do you hope they're going to be, but working with a kind of a sensible baseline. And then really articulating what you want the future to look like as well. And then starting to work back from there. Because if the future is, around a set of behaviours or around a set of ambitions, being able to sort of draw the lines between where we are now and where you want to be in the future becomes really important. And it's not about gap analysis. It's about the kind of the stories and the conversations that you need to generate in order to help people see where the movement would be. Because if you talk about transformation, I think that really freaks people out. It freaks me out sometimes. Transform.
I think there's something also that's quite basic and true in all transformation areas, where you'll get some people will see what the next curve is, what the next paradigm is quite early. But you'll have lots of people who don't. They neither have the they don't have the opportunity or the inclination to see what is going to be different. So when we're thinking about how we might support people through that, you have to kind of work with the fact that you'll have some that will get it really quickly and actually lead you through where that might be. But there'll be big chunks of other people who just can't see around the next bend, and they're firmly fixed where they are. And that's regardless of which organisation you're in, that's probably quite common. I'd say, certainly, Julie, the number of organisations you work with, is that fair?
Yeah. I think that's just human nature. So we've got folk who just go, yep, like digital, don't mind changing, not particularly attached to, where I am or how I do things. And there are other people who are super attached to the way that they work and will fight like hellcats to keep it. I think that's fair.
Yeah. They've invested a lot to get to that point. I think that's another recognition that part of the change work that we support is that it's not to say that that's necessarily a wrong place to be. It's just a representation of actually there's a lot of hours, a lot of emotional energy has got them to that point. Yeah. But then actually, certainly on the scale of the piece of work we're doing at the moment, some things are going to move that will remove that from people, and that's a place where you need to be. You need to, as an organisation, you need to be comfortable with that's going to happen.
Do you find that sort of splits sort of along generations at all? And I don't necessarily want to sort of lead into broad, potentially offensive stereotypes here. But for the sake of argument, I mean, I think, let's say in a university context, I would imagine that there are quite a lot of Gen X people who have been doing things a certain way for a long period of time and very successful doing it that way, and are don't necessarily see the value in digital the introduction of digital technologies into the way that they're doing things. And then there are perhaps millennials, which is, again, I don't really like using that as a group.
Oh,
but
my Lord. You could not
Are
do
you
my
just
job.
building up a straw man for us to knock down here, Ross? I mean, also, I'm Gen X. So is Julie. What on earth is going on here? This is mental.
Well, I think, I don't...
It's just about the worst question we've had on the podcast.
That's quite a high bar.
Hang on a second, Mr. Ferguson, because honestly, Ross, I think what you're alluding to is exactly what you bump into when you're doing these types of inquiries. So there is an underlying assumption when I come into an organisation or when we're working with an organisation that it will go along these lines, that, older means X, younger means Y. And you've got to sort of park that to some extent. It's to do with levels of attachment. It's to do with how fond I am of doing things the way that I do them. And I don't have to be like 60 to be terribly attached to what I'm doing. So it's easy to generalise like that. And there's a cautionary tale around doing it that way, because the other thing that can do is really feed into people's own stories about whether they can change. And I think you've got to hold to the belief that even though you're really attached to doing it this way, there was a time when you had fluidity and you were able to change. And so you've got to help people tap back into that. So I think I think you're on shaky territory, Rob.
It was a bit of a straw man question, as Owen said. I was hoping that you would knock it down.
It's genuinely it's genuinely what you bump into when you're doing these inquiries. That there's a stereotype about if you go into such and such a department, you'll find such and such a person, and I think our job is to try and identify where that's not the case and where the countercultural stuff sits, so that you can play that back into the organisation and show that it doesn't have to be that way, that if it's going to be transformative, it can be another way as well.
So how do you go about uncovering that stuff around the different kind of levels of attachment that people have to what they see as their jobs or what they own or how they do things, because I would imagine that's the starting point, is uncovering that stuff and then coming up with a series of strategies to help people go on their own journey towards something that's quite different from that.
We talk about stress testing. So you when you speak to people, quite often they'll tell you that it's one way, and then you introduce the kit or you introduce the thing, and you find actually the response is slightly different, and you've got to stress test it. You've got to stress test the theories and the things that people are sort of espousing to you. So it's being constantly curious. That sounds like a really good soundbite, doesn't it? It's true. You have to be constantly curious. You've got to be prepared to go, we think it's going to go this way. Oh, okay, no, that didn't happen. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
He's looking at me like, no, that's not how this works. It's much more planned.
No, I think if you're looking from an individual perspective, as opposed from how does the program operate to that? The program has mechanisms to engage with people to get to a point where you can get to release. I think from an individual perspective, it is almost precisely that. It's you know through their early contact with the system, and that might be at a testing stage, or it might be actually at the point where they're getting trained to actually push the right buttons in the right order and learn what the new processes are. That is happening in the room there. You might be telling them to press F4 or whatever it is, but actually there's something else going on in their brain at the time. So there's an opportunity for it to get identified there. But the reality is you are in a different environment. That you're in a training environment, albeit one they might be familiar with. It's actually when you get back into the work and actually they're doing the work that they then have the realization that actually what I did last Monday isn't what I need to do this week. And at that point, it's entirely down to the individual, the team around them, and and how they're supported by peers and leaders around them. So that so our support then is then obviously looking at how do we help that support generate around that if we can. There's obviously already exists in terms of, it's an existing team. It has an existing support structure around it. We're just trying to make pay some care and attention to that, so that as we know something will change on such and such a date, that people know what's going to happen and what they need to do. But in reality, reality will hit at the moment when they actually start processing whatever it is they're processing, if that's their role.
I was reading a paper. Deloitte recently put out a study about digital transformation, which found that I think it was 94% of those surveyed agreed that digital transformation was very important within organizations. But I also found that only 50% of CEOs regarded digital transformation as key to maintaining profitability. And maybe it has less relevance in a university context, or maybe I'm being naive, but a lot of digital transformation initiatives end up being sort of defensive. So rather than investing money in research and development and thinking of how technologies can actually sort of help us improve the way that we're working, it's about how do we protect ourselves from digital disruption and from things that are happening to us rather than things that we can affect. Is that something that you recognize?
To some extent, I think the world as I see it is that transformation's transformation. It might be digital, or it might be that we're trying to do culture change or whatever it is. But whenever organisations start to talk about transforming, the defences do come up, often for very good reason. But like true transformation isn't moving the deck chairs around. It's getting everybody off the boat type thing. So it requires something different, in my view, from the leadership. It requires something different from the people in the organisation. If you're just changing things and introducing things, that's one thing. But if you're trying to do a wholesale, different ways of working, or I think things like HMV is going to be very interesting to see if they can transform the mindset of, the people who are working there. It's those sorts of things I think are really, really interesting, because it requires something different of the people who work there. And I've said this point time and time again, but quite often we sign up to an organisation for a good set of reasons. And when the organisation says, we're going to transform, people are like, that's not what I signed up to do. Like, that's not my jam. That's not why I'm there. So, I think it might be about digital transformation, but ultimately it's about culture. Ultimately it's about why people work the way that they work and why they turn up to work, which I think you need to look at if you're going to change anything.
I think that's really interesting, actually, because the flavour of digital, there are certain things I think that come with that. So there's certain underlying assumptions that digital equals data is good. Organisations act ethically with data. That anytime, anywhere is good. There's things that are kind of written into what it might mean for some types of digital transformation, be that how do I consume my products through HMV, or how do I process whatever it is through an order, but there's some those things, they may seem slightly abstract, but when they come down to what do I value, mm-hmm. and what do I believe, they cut deep. And I think that's where you get that reaction that you're talking about, in terms of, actually, hold a minute, this doesn't feel like the same company I joined however long ago.
It's interesting because we've done some cultural walkthroughs in the last couple of weeks, and one of the conversations that has come up has been about the ethics of, if we have 24-hour access, and if there is data, then how do we make sure that's secure? How do we make sure it's accurate? Do we want 24-hour access? Do we want to encourage 24-hour ability? And those are, I think, really relevant and good questions to ask culturally. Like, how do we want to be? So we talk about transforming, but what do we mean by that? Like, what are we asking people on the other side of the transformation? So those are kind of some good conversations that are running at the moment, and really important ones for my mind, about what it is to work here.
And the potential impact that can have on people's health and well-being, both physical and mental, because just because you can respond to a support request that comes through 24/7 from your phone doesn't mean you should feel the need to do that, and how do you have those conversations? So you guys have mentioned the role of leaders and leadership as part of this. So how do you go about equipping the people who are leading within the organisation? So may not necessarily be, they are involved in the project, but they're not sort of part of the project team. But how do you go about equipping them with supporting their people for the change?
I think actually, there's some universal truths across different pieces of work actually, and not purely this one. But if you're introducing new technology, you've got a capability element, which is for some people that will mean they need to learn to do things in a certain way. So, and it might be using a different device or a different set of technology on an existing device. So there's that fundamentals. That do we understand how to use what we need to use and when we need to use it? I think that's certainly one element of it. I think another part which I think is really interesting, I think, and why we're working with Julie really is to think about, to come back actually to what does that mean differently in terms of how I lead. So there are a number of tensions, dilemmas that will arise by the nature of having change, and I won't always have the right answer for that. So where we can provide guidance, we can provide lists of things and really excited stuff like that, help guides and stuff. But it's all quite transactionally based. The transformation part is in your head, it's between your ears. It's a conversation with somebody else. So I think the role for L&D OD in that is to initiate conversations. So at whatever level in the organisation. But you can't hold all the conversations, of course. So you need to then help others then have that conversation as it cascades throughout the organisation. So and there is no right answer either. So they will have to find where they fit on a particular dilemma or tension and arrive at a place where they're comfortable having the conversation with that individual. And I think that's an area that I'm really interested in terms of how do you, because it's really sticky and gnarly, isn't it? That
my favourite word. So the reality of that is not having a nice, neat leadership program where that's very classroom based with lots of content. Like that's not the approach that we would advocate at Fuchsia Blue. So it is that thing about creating spaces for conversations, but the genuine conversation. So if you are going to transform, there's going to be times when you are leading through absolute ambiguity, through times of complete uncertainty, and that requires something different personally and professionally, we believe. So it's about giving the leaders the opportunity to have those conversations, but properly ask them to have those conversations with each other, because quite often people will pretend to know for very good reasons. They'll think that they should know. They'll lead in ways that they're used to leading, like this is how it's always worked for me. So it's about giving people spaces to have different conversations, but also put them in touch with people who can help them think differently and sort of shift their mindset a bit. So being really purposeful when you've got people together about why you've got them there in the first place, and then saying to them, let's have this particular conversation about transformation and leading through transformation and why that's more gnarly. And what do we do with gnarly things? Because we quite like things that are straightforward and simple and linear. And sometimes it's just knackering to have to keep playing around with something that's not straightforward and nice and linear. So have those conversations. I think that's really important.
And I think also to recognise that in successful organisations, they're actually functioning. They are leading. They are working at this moment in time. They bring a lot of strengths with them. What's changing if you apply the transformation part of the to it? Sorry, is that the world is then changing around you quicker than you are currently. So therefore, whilst you may take a lot of what you already have with you, the trick I think is helping people work out where there is significant difference, which might mean I need what I did so far won't help me when I get to that point there, or before I get to that point there. So absolutely strengths-based support, but our role is to try and help to find those gaps, to imagine different futures that then put me in a place where actually I might need to try something else.
Great. Just conscious of time, so I think we'll move on to what I learned this week, unless there's anything that you particularly wanted to mention that we've not touched on so far.
Digital transformation is boringly analog and relational.
There's another soundbite.
I've been practicing that one.
No. I just know these things.
Wasn't that in your blog?
I am nothing if not repetitious.
Play the classics.
Hey, listen, they've been hard won, my friend. So
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on now to our regular feature, What I Learned This Week, where we each share something we've learned in the last 7 days. Owen, would you like to get us started?
Sure thing. So what I learned this week, I learned another. I think maybe I relearned a lesson about the Twitter. In that, no matter how many really useful, excellent, academic research papers you share, or the devastating analysis of the state of the industry, the things that absolutely take off on Twitter are the most banal. So I tweeted out something about socks. Right, I bought some new socks, and I am extremely pleased with my new socks. I was sharing my pleasure with these. Anyway, it is the most popular tweet according to all the Twitter analytics metrics that I have ever put out there. So that adds on to tweets about my dogs, my gardening, and now my socks. Are the things that people have genuinely engaged with. All the other nonsense is not worth it. So I'm actually thinking about getting into the sock business, if I'm honest.
I think we need to start optimizing the podcast for socks, gardening, and puppies.
just watch. Yeah, your stats will go through the roof.
Yeah. Julie, what did you learn this week?
I hate this question. I think I learn all the time. So this week I have been. The last time I was on here, I said I'd learned a new knitting stitch, and this week I've been learning to weave. And this, I don't know why. Whenever I come on the Good Practice podcast, this makes me sound much more homely than I actually am. But yes, I started to learn how.
A classic Gen X pastime, weaving.
It's a good job we're not geographically close. So yes, it's weaving as in not basket weaving, but weaving as in with a loom, and starting to play around with that, which has been really interesting and really cool.
Are you making something in particular, or?
Well, eventually I will be. I was just trying to give it a go before I'm thinking about buying a loom. And it's to do with having some downtime and not looking at screens and all of those digital hippie things that are happening now, where I feel like I spend quite a lot of my time plugged in, and I don't particularly want to read. I just want to kind of listen to things, and so weaving might be the way forward.
It's amazing how pastimes are things that used to be actual work pre-industrial revolution.
Yeah, I know. I'm fully aware of all of that. And I am laughing at my own kind of my own clichédness, but it's a very lovely thing. And it's rhythmic. It's just there's something, again, it's like the knitting. There's something very meditative about it and very peaceful, which I appreciate, because quite often life's not like that. So. Yes.
Lovely. Dan, what about you?
I think I had a bit of a podcast binge over the weekend. I was helping my teenage son paint his bedroom, and we were listening. I switched off his music and started listening to some podcasts with him. And we found a couple from Radio 4 that was about the physics of time and the measurement of time. And it kind of melted our heads a bit. If did time exist before the Big Bang? If we don't measure it, does time actually exist, etc., etc.? And to be fair, he put up with me for a little bit, and in the end we went back to his music again. But I think it's just there is a love of learning, I think, and I'm really pleased. We share that with the family, and Jake does that. That's what he claims. He's always learning on YouTube, apparently. So I think I learned lots of things that I now don't understand about time.
Oh, that sounds right up my alley. I'll need to get the names of the podcasts from you. I am already intrigued.
Yeah, if you could send us a link to that, we'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
He's not offering to put weaving in the show. It's not happening.
If you have a good weaving blog we can share, I will quite happily put it in the show notes.
Or even just a link to the weave to the loom that you're thinking about getting. I've no idea where you'd get a loom. eBay, presumably.
You can get them from Amazon.
Can you?
They're more yeah.
What an age we live in.
Can you make socks on them?
There we go.
That could be a thing.
I've now wasted all that money on socks.
No, it wasn't money wasted, and you got like massive hits on Twitter. It's like an investment.
Which is what it's all about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I also have a podcast recommendation, The Dropout, which is a co-production from ABC and Nightline, and it was a story that I wasn't familiar with. It was about Elizabeth Holmes, who was, I think, the youngest ever self-made female billionaire. She founded a company called Theranos in the US in 2004, which basically, the claim of the company was that they could run hundreds of blood tests from a single drop of blood. So rather than going, somebody having to look around for a vein and drawing blood, which can be very painful, a lot of people, don't enjoy the experience, you could just get a sort of pinprick on your finger and they'd be able to go off and run hundreds of tests. And it was, the problem with it was that the product never worked. And yet, in spite of that, they were able to sort of dupe the world and Silicon Valley and all these sort of politicians, lots of celebrities, the DeVos family, who are one of the wealthiest families in the US, invested in it. And the company at one point was valued at over $9 billion. And so it's just, she sort of poached lots of people from Apple. She was obsessed with Steve Jobs. She had this sort of deep voice that she would put on whenever she would speak on stage, but apparently her actual voice was much higher than that. So it's just a really interesting story that it was able to sort of go on for as long as it did. And before I worked in Good Practice, I was sort of very briefly in the kind of tech startup space. And, the sort of joke that everybody was aware of was that everybody in tech, you ask them how they're doing and it's, oh, we're killing it. That's what everybody says, that everybody's doing really well. And it just sort of makes you think, this company, which was lauded by celebrities and politicians and seemed to be worth, billions of dollars, was actually completely worthless. It just sort of makes you think how many other of these sort of tech companies are there out there like that. But yeah, really, really good listen. So I would advise you check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes. And that's all for this week. If you'd like to share your thoughts on this show, you can find us all on Twitter. Owen is
at Owen Ferguson. Look out for the socks tweet.
Is it pinned?
No, it's not actually. It's a podcast that's pinned. I should pin it.
Yeah. Julie is
at Fuchsia
underscore.
Fuchsia underscore. I don't even know my Twitter.
Down slash.
Try that again.
What is a down slash?
At Fuchsia underscore blue.
Dan is
at Daniel.Caborn.
And I'm at Ross_Dickie. You can also tweet at Good Practice or at Good Practice AUS. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.